8 a.m. A new day began for Silas, filled with excitement and hope as he had waited a week for this day. But the calm voice on the other end of the line quickly extinguished his hopes. "Silas, thank you for applying, but unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with another candidate." Silas's throat tightened, his stomach dropping as he forced himself to answer. "I see. Thank you for letting me know." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving the room eerily silent. For a moment, he sat motionless, staring at the faded wallpaper. His gaze slowly shifted to the couch in the corner, where Kyle lay, wrapped in a patched blanket, his small form a painful reminder of what was at stake. Silas stood, his bare feet making a soft sound against the icy floor. The cold seeped into his skin as he walked to the kitchen, his mind still reeling. Silas opened the refrigerator with a creak, its interior bathed in the faint yellow glow of the single working bulb. Inside, a single slice of bread rested on the middle shelf, accompanied by a near-empty tub of butter pushed to the side. The shelves above and below were barren, except for a half-used bottle of ketchup and a lone jar of pickles, untouched for weeks. He stood there for a moment, gripping the door handle as if willing more food to appear, before sighing and reaching for the meager contents. The small kitchen behind him was a reflection of his struggles, cramped and dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper that hinted at years of wear and tear. The table was scratched and uneven, held steady by a folded piece of cardboard under one leg. A single chair sat nearby, its seat patched with duct tape, evidence of countless repairs. The narrow living room was visible through a doorway, where a faded couch doubled as a bed for Kyle each night. Kyle stirred, his small voice mumbling sleepily. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, buddy," Silas replied, forcing a brightness into his tone. "Breakfast's almost ready." Kyle sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What about you? You already eat?" Silas turned, a smile already plastered onto his face. "Yep, had mine earlier. Don't you worry about me." He slid the bread onto a chipped plate, spreading the butter thinly to make it stretch. He placed it in front of Kyle and ruffled his hair. "Eat up, champ." Kyle didn't hesitate, his attention fixed on the food, while Silas rested his hands on the table and silently watched each small bite his son took. As the minutes ticked by, Silas glanced at the clock. It was almost time to leave. Rising from his seat, he gathered Kyle's backpack, checking it carefully to ensure that everything was in place. The two stepped out into the bustling streets, Silas gripping Kyle's hand as they navigated through the morning chaos of the neighborhood. Halfway to school, Kyle looked up at Silas with curiosity in his eyes, asking if the job call had come through. Silas steadied his expression, masking the disappointment that still lingered from the morning. Without breaking stride, he assured his son that this wasn't the one, but that other opportunities would come. Kyle seemed to accept this without question, squeezing his father's hand slightly tighter, as if his silent encouragement could make it true. As they neared the school gates, the clamor of children laughing and shouting created a stark contrast to Silas's inner struggles. For a brief moment, Silas lingered, watching him blend into the crowd of other children. His boy seemed so small compared to the weight they both carried. With a sigh, he turned and made his way home through the worn streets, his mind already drifting to the empty space, waiting for him. The small apartment greeted him with its usual silence. Silas set his keys on the chipped counter and moved toward the creaking chair near the window. The old computer sat atop the table, its screen smudged and keyboard worn, a testament to the many resumes it had seen. Sitting down, Silas opened the browser out of habit. As the page loaded, his eyes scanned through familiar headlines. Seeking customer service rep. Part-time data entry. Driver needed for local deliveries. Each one felt like a closed door. Yet, just as he was about to close the browser, A new posting caught his eye. Accountant needed, Seraphis Consultants. The title alone made him pause. It was rare to find a job aligned with his skills, let alone one at a company with a name he recognized. For a moment, Silas hesitated. The countless rejections he had faced made him wary. What would make this time any different? Still, the flicker of hope was hard to ignore. He clicked the link. The description was clear and concise, listing qualifications that matched his background almost perfectly. It felt like a long shot, but something urged him forward. One more try, he muttered to himself as he adjusted his resume. He reviewed it with precision, checking every detail as if his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. After attaching the document and filling out the application form, Silas hit Submit. The screen confirmed his application had been sent, but he felt no surge of excitement. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. Experience had taught him not to expect much. The hours passed slowly as Silas busied himself with small tasks around the apartment. He was wiping down the counter when the phone buzzed on the table. Startled, he grabbed it quickly. "Hello? This is Silas speaking," he answered, his voice steady despite the sudden spike of nerves. "Hello, Mr. Silas," a woman's professional tone greeted him. "This is Rachel from Seraphis Consultants. We've reviewed your application and would like to invite you for an interview tomorrow morning." For a moment, Silas was silent, caught off guard. "Tomorrow?" "Yes, of course," he replied, his words spilling out too quickly. "Thank you, I'll be there." After hanging up, Silas stared at the phone in his hand. It felt surreal. The simple act of being called for an interview had reignited something within him. Determined not to let this opportunity slip away, he set to work preparing for the day ahead. That evening, Kyle returned home with his usual energy, dropping his school bag by the door. "Hey, Dad, how was your day?" he asked, his bright eyes scanning Silas's face. "I've got some good news," Silas said, a faint smile creeping onto his lips. "I have an interview tomorrow." Kyle's face lit up instantly. "Really? That's awesome." His excitement filled the small room, bringing warmth to the space that often felt cold. Later that night, after Cale had eaten and settled into his homework, Silas took out his only suit. The fabric was old, but clean. He pressed it carefully, smoothing out every wrinkle with deliberate care. From the corner of the room, Kyle watched quietly. "You're going to do great, Dad," Kyle said softly, breaking the silence. Silas glanced at his son and nodded. The boy's unwavering faith in him was a reminder of why he couldn't afford to fail. The next morning, Silas left the modest apartment early. The city was already alive, the rhythm of morning commuters merging with the clatter of footsteps and distant car horns. Silas tightened his grip on his worn leather bag, the one carrying a carefully printed resume he had spent the night reviewing. He had reminded Cale to stay safe at school before leaving, the boy's voice still ringing in his ears. "Good luck, Dad. I know you'll get it." Silas had only smiled and nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. As he approached the Seraphis Consultants building, his steps slowed. Sitting at the edge of the pavement, huddled beneath a tattered blanket, was an elderly man. His face was deeply lined, his hands trembling as they clutched a small cardboard sign that simply read, "Hungry." Silas paused. The man looked up, meeting his gaze with pale, weary eyes. "Sir," the man croaked, his voice hoarse but firm. "Anything to eat? I haven't had a bite since yesterday." Silas hesitated. His hand instinctively went to his coat pocket, where the last piece of bread he had saved for himself lay wrapped in paper. It wasn't much, just a remnant of last night's meager dinner. He looked at the man again, his hollow cheeks and desperate expression. Without a word, Silas pulled out the bread and extended it toward him. The man accepted it with a frail but steady hand. "Here," Silas said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "It's not much, but it's all I've got." The man's eyes lit up, the kind of light that transcends gratitude and carries something deeper. He unwrapped the bread carefully, almost reverently, before taking a small bite. After a moment, he looked back up at Silas. "What's your name, son?" the man asked, his voice now steadier, as though the simple act of eating had restored a piece of his strength. "Silas," he replied, adjusting his bag. "I'm heading to a job interview. Wish me luck." The old man smiled, the lines on his face softening into something almost warm. "You'll get the job, Silas," he said with certainty, as though the words were more fact than prediction. "I can feel it." Silas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I hope you're right. Thanks." With that, he turned and walked into the imposing glass building that loomed above them both. The receptionist at the front desk greeted him with a practiced smile, handing him a visitor's badge and pointing him toward the elevator. Silas pressed the button for the 4th floor, his heartbeat steady but expectant. He stepped out into a sleek modern lobby where a handful of other candidates were waiting. Each of them looked polished, their suits crisp, their postures confident. Silas adjusted his collar, smoothing out the wrinkles of his carefully ironed but aging shirt. Just as he found a seat, a voice called out from the reception area. "Excuse me, everyone. We regret to inform you that today's interviews have been cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience." The words hit Silas like a weight. For a moment, he just sat there, processing the unexpected turn of events. Around him, murmurs of disappointment rippled through the room. Some candidates left immediately, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, while others lingered as if waiting for clarification. Silas stood, his mind clouded with a mix of confusion and frustration. As he exited the building, the cold air felt sharper, cutting through the brief warmth he had carried from the morning. His thoughts turned to Cale, the boy's hopeful voice echoing in his mind. He felt like he had failed, though the day wasn't over yet. The streets seemed longer on the way back. As Silas walked, the image of the old man replayed itself in his mind, the certainty in his voice, the strange conviction in his words. "You'll get the job." It was such a small thing, and yet it lingered, a stubborn ember of hope that refused to extinguish. By the time Silas reached his apartment, he felt a heaviness settle over him. But beneath that weight, there was still the faintest glimmer of belief, fragile but persistent, waiting for its moment to reignite. Silas pushed the door open, stepping into the quiet house. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the small, worn-out living room. He set his bag down carefully, as if even the slightest sound would shatter the fragile air of the space. His shoulders slumped, the weight of disappointment heavy on his frame. For a moment, he stood motionless, his eyes lingering on the table where Cale's books were scattered. The sight of the boy's earnest notes stirred something inside him, but it didn't chase away the dull ache in his chest. He moved to the kitchen, brushing past the narrow counters and opening the fridge. A faint creak echoed as he stared at the sparse contents. A carton of milk, a half-eaten loaf of bread, and a few apples past their prime. Silas closed the door slowly, his thoughts spinning back to the empty promise of the morning. The words of the receptionist still rang in his head. "We're sorry, but Mr. Magnus had an urgent matter. All interviews today are cancelled." It felt like the ground had given way beneath him, leaving him scrambling to hold on. He grabbed a rag from the sink, wiping the counter mindlessly, more for the act of doing something than for the mess. The door swung open abruptly, and Kyle's voice called out, bright and full of energy. "Dad, I'm home." Silas straightened and turned just in time to see his son's eager face appear around the corner. Kyle tossed his backpack onto the chair and bounded over. "How was it? Did you nail it?" Silas hesitated. He wasn't sure how to answer. The hopeful light in Kyle's eyes made him pause longer than he meant to. Finally, he let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. The interview was cancelled. Something came up with the boss. Kyle's expression faltered briefly, but he recovered quickly, pulling out a chair to sit. "That's okay," he said, his tone steady. "There's always another chance, right?" Silas nodded, though the lump in his throat made it hard to speak. "Right," he managed, his voice low. He sank into the seat across from Kyle, watching as his son leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You've got this, Dad," Kyle said, his voice firm but quiet. "I know you'll find something. You always do." The simple words hit Silas with more force than he expected. He smiled faintly, reaching out to ruffle Kyle's hair. "Thanks, buddy. I needed that." The two sat there for a moment, the silence comfortable yet heavy with unspoken thoughts. The low hum of the fridge filled the room, mingling with the distant sound of traffic from outside. Then, without warning, the sharp ring of the phone shattered the stillness. Silas froze, his heart jumping into his throat. Kyle's eyes widened and he whispered, "Answer it, Dad." Silas reached for the phone, his hands unsteady as he lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice was tight, edged with both hope and fear. "Mr. Silas?" The voice on the other end was professional, but warm. "This is Anna, from Seraphis Consultants. I'm calling to reschedule your interview. Would you be available tomorrow morning at 10? Silas blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Yes, absolutely. I'll be there," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Great," Anna replied. "We'll see you then. Have a good evening." Silas hung up and turned to Kyle, his face breaking into a wide smile. "They called back," he said, the words tumbling out. "The interview's back on." Kyle jumped up, his grin matching his father's. "I told you, Dad. I knew it." Silas chuckled, pulling his son into a quick hug. For the first time that day, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little lighter. Silas paused outside the heavy wooden door, clutching the worn leather folder containing his resume and references. His palms were clammy, but he tightened his grip and drew in a steadying breath. This moment had been a long time coming, and he wasn't about to let nerves derail his chance at a better future for himself and Kyle. The receptionist had been polite but distant, pointing him toward the large conference room where the interview would take place. Pushing the door open, Silas stepped inside and froze. Sitting at the head of a polished mahogany table was a man whose face he instantly recognized. The disheveled old man he'd given his last piece of bread to just yesterday was now impeccably dressed, his suit tailored to perfection. Silas blinked, certain he was imagining things. Magnus stood and greeted him with a smile, inviting him to take a seat. As Silas moved toward the chair opposite, his mind raced with questions. Magnus didn't make him wait long for an explanation. He admitted that what Silas had witnessed earlier in the week wasn't a coincidence. It was, in fact, an unorthodox test. Magnus had been seeking candidates who displayed not only technical expertise, but also integrity and compassion. "You were the only one who stopped," Magnus added, his tone calm but firm. The weight of the statement settled over Silas. He asked cautiously whether others had ignored Magnus, and the answer was a simple shake of the head. Many had walked by without a glance, Magnus explained, but Silas had given the last of what he had, an act that spoke volumes about his character. Silas absorbed the explanation in silence, his initial confusion giving way to cautious understanding. Magnus shifted the conversation, gesturing toward the resume folder on the table and asking about Silas's journey. He wanted to know what had brought Silas to this point and why he thought he would be a good fit for Seraphis Consultants. Straightening in his seat, Silas decided to speak candidly. He described the challenges he had faced since his wife's passing, juggling his son's schooling, their home, and countless job rejections. He explained that being a single father often made employers doubt his reliability, though he had never let that deter him. Instead, he had worked tirelessly to sharpen his skills and stay ready for any opportunity. Magnus listened carefully, occasionally nodding. He then asked Silas what he believed he could bring to Seraphis. Silas answered firmly that he could offer honesty, a fresh perspective, and the resilience to perform under pressure, qualities he believed would strengthen the team. Magnus leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. He told Silas he had met many candidates with polished resumes, but few with the authenticity and determination Silas displayed. It was clear to him that Silas was exactly the kind of person he wanted on his team. "As of today, consider yourself hired," Magnus announced, his voice steady. He explained that Silas would begin with a probation period, but added that he had no doubt Silas would exceed expectations. To ensure Silas could start on stable footing, Magnus offered a signing bonus as well. The offer left Silas momentarily speechless. His gratitude was evident as he shook Magnus's hand, the firm grip a confirmation of the trust being placed in him. Magnus ended the meeting by welcoming him to Seraphis and expressing confidence in his future contributions. Walking out of the conference room, Silas felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. For the first time in years, the road ahead seemed less daunting. With this opportunity, he knew he could finally start building the future he and Cale deserved. Silas entered the office on his first day, clutching his worn leather briefcase. The open layout buzzed with subdued conversations and the hum of computers. No one paused to greet him. Their sideways glances carried curiosity, laced with doubt. Silas knew the whispers had already started. "That's him, the single dad." A voice drifted from a nearby cubicle. "He's got his hands full at home. How's he supposed to keep up here?" Another murmured. Silas straightened his back and walked toward the glass-paneled office of Mrs. Vargas, his direct manager. She looked up briefly from her stack of papers as he knocked. Her smile was thin, more polite than welcoming. "Mr. Calloway," she said, motioning to the chair in front of her desk. "Welcome to Seraphis Consultants. I trust you've been briefed about our protocols." "Yes, ma'am," Silas replied, keeping his tone steady. "I'm eager to contribute." Her response was a curt nod. "Good. You'll find your desk in the finance division. We'll have a team meeting this afternoon. Be prepared." The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Silas spent the hours leading up to it, familiarizing himself with the company's financial reports. The numbers painted a concerning picture. Expenses were unnecessarily high, and several departments were operating well above budget. Silas scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, noting areas that needed immediate attention. When the time came, he entered the conference room, greeted by a sea of indifferent faces. Magnus, the company's imposing yet approachable CEO, sat at the head of the long oak table. Mrs. Vargas stood near the projector, preparing her slides. Silas took a seat at the far end, silently observing as the meeting began. As Mrs. Vargas outlined the quarterly expenditures, Silas noticed the unease among the team. They knew the numbers weren't adding up. Magnus's sharp eyes swept across the room, his fingers tapping the table in quiet expectation. "Does anyone have suggestions on how to address these rising costs?" Magnus finally asked. The room fell silent. Silas hesitated, aware of the skeptical eyes on him, but the opportunity was too significant to pass up. Clearing his throat, he raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Calloway," Magnus said, his tone neutral. Silas stood, holding his notepad tightly. "I've reviewed the reports, and it seems many of our departments are duplicating resources. By centralizing procurement and automating expense tracking, we could reduce costs by at least 20%. A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Vargas's expression remained guarded, though her raised eyebrow hinted at reluctant interest. Magnus leaned back in his chair, studying Silas. "That's an interesting perspective. Do you have any specific implementation ideas? Silas nodded. Yes, sir. I've outlined a preliminary plan that involves consolidating vendors and introducing software to monitor expenditures in real time. I'd be happy to draft a detailed proposal. Magnus's lips curved into a faint smile. I'd like to see that. Good work, Mr. Calloway. After the meeting, Silas returned to his desk. While some colleagues continued to glance his way with thinly veiled doubt, a few offered nods of acknowledgement. It was a small shift, but Silas felt the tide beginning to turn. Mrs. Vargas approached him later that week, holding a folder of revised budgets. I'll admit, Calloway, your suggestion was effective, she said, her tone begrudgingly respectful. Keep this up, and you might prove me wrong. Silas took the folder, meeting her gaze with quiet determination. Thank you, Mrs. Vargas. I'll do my best. Over the following months, Silas's meticulous work and consistent results began to silence the whispers. Projects he handled not only met, but often exceeded expectations. Gradually, the skepticism in his colleagues' eyes was replaced by genuine respect. Magnus occasionally stopped by Silas's desk, offering words of encouragement. Mrs. Vargas's demeanor softened, her interactions less formal and more collaborative. Silas no longer felt like an outsider in the office. He had earned his place. Walking out of the office, Silas felt the weight of those first uncertain weeks lift. The whispers were gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that he belonged. The evening carried a stillness that Silas found both calming and disconcerting. He sat at the kitchen table, the dim light overhead casting soft shadows on the stack of unpaid bills he was trying to organize. The door creaked open behind him, and Kyle stepped in, clutching something tightly in his hand. Silas glanced up and saw his son's hunched posture, his slow steps toward the table. Kyle placed a crumpled report card on the table and sat down silently. Silas noticed the hesitation in his movements, the way his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Silas unfolded the paper, scanning the grades. They were lower than expected, a significant drop from Kyle's usual performance. Silas set the paper down and looked at Kyle, who still wouldn't meet his eyes. There was no need for long explanations. He could sense the weight on his son's shoulders, heavier than any failing mark. He reached over and placed a steady hand on Kyle's shoulder. "We'll fix this," he said calmly. His words weren't meant to comfort, but to set a course. The boy finally glanced up, unsure, but willing to believe his father's certainty. That night, Silas rearranged the kitchen table, spreading Kyle's books and notebooks across its worn surface. They began with the basics, math problems that had seemed insurmountable to Kyle. Silas guided him through the steps with deliberate patience, pointing out patterns and encouraging Kyle to take his time. The progress was slow at first. Kyle stumbled, erased, and tried again, his frustration barely hidden. Silas watched carefully, waiting for the right moment. "You're not rushing," he said matter-of-factly. "That's already an improvement." Kyle glanced at him, a flicker of determination replacing the earlier doubt. Gradually, the boy began to navigate the equations with more confidence, solving problems that had once felt impossible. Silas offered quiet nods of approval, knowing those gestures meant more than words. The subjects changed, but the rhythm remained the same. History was woven into engaging stories. Science turned into experiments, explained with clarity. By the time the clock ticked past midnight, both of them were tired, but satisfied. Silas cleared the books and sent Kyle to bed, knowing they had made progress, not just in academics, but in rebuilding Kyle's confidence. Over the following weeks, their evening sessions became a routine. Silas adjusted his work around Kyle's schedule, making sure they had time to prepare for upcoming tests. Slowly, Kyle began to improve. His approach to studying changed, no longer marked by hesitance, but by a quiet determination that mirrored his father's resolve. One afternoon, Cale burst through the door, his face lit with excitement. He handed Silas a fresh report card. Silas took it and scanned the grades, noting the clear improvement. A sense of pride swelled within him, not just for the results, but for Cale's resilience in facing his challenges. Cale stood, shifting his weight nervously as Silas folded the paper. "You worked for this," Silas said, his voice steady. The boy's relief was visible as he relaxed, his expression brightening. That evening, they marked the occasion with a modest meal, a dish Silas hadn't cooked in months, but knew Cale loved. They sat at the table, enjoying a quiet moment of shared accomplishment. It wasn't about celebration. It was about recognizing effort, the kind that turned difficult days into stepping stones for something better. Silas stood in front of the small mirror hanging crookedly on the wall of his bedroom. The room was dim, lit only by the pale winter sun filtering through the curtains. His fingers traced the lapels of the navy blue suit jacket he'd purchased just the day before. It wasn't designer, but the stitching was clean and the fabric felt sturdy. He had spent hours choosing this one, weighing quality against cost, thinking about how it would look not just on him, but on the future he was trying to build. Kyle peeked into the room, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You look sharp, Dad," he said, his voice carrying a note of pride. Silas smiled, tugging at the sleeves to make sure they fell just right. "Thanks, kid," he replied. "Figured it was time to step up a bit at work. First impressions matter, even after you've already started." Kyle nodded, though his focus had shifted to tying his shoes. The two had developed a rhythm in their mornings, efficient, quiet, but companionable. As Silas grabbed his briefcase and they stepped outside, the chill of the morning hit them both, crisp and bracing. The week ahead promised challenges Silas couldn't fully anticipate. Magnus, true to his reputation, didn't hand out responsibilities lightly. Silas had been tasked with overseeing the financial restructuring of one of the firm's long-standing clients, a family-owned business teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. It was a project others in the office had avoided, citing its complexity and the emotional stakes involved. Arriving at Seraphis Consultants, Silas walked past the familiar hum of keyboards and muffled phone calls. The suit seemed to work. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged him weeks ago now greeted him with nods and murmured good mornings. Even Mrs. Vargas, his once skeptical manager, gave him a faint smile of approval as he passed her desk. Settling into his office, Silas spread out the financial reports across his desk. His work required a keen eye and steady nerves. The numbers told a grim story: debt piling up, revenue shrinking. He rolled up his sleeves and began marking inconsistencies, seeking patterns that others might have missed. Hours slipped by as he immersed himself in the data, breaking only when Magnus stopped by to check on his progress. "How's it coming along, Silas?" Magnus asked, his voice calm but expectant. "It's complicated," Silas admitted, gesturing to the reports. "But I think there's a way to stabilize their cash flow, at least in the short term. It'll require renegotiating their supplier contracts and cutting some overhead expenses, but it's doable." Magnus listened intently, his expression revealing nothing until he finally said, "Good. That's the kind of thinking I was hoping to see from you. Keep me posted." As Silas returned to his work, he thought about the trust Magnus had placed in him. It wasn't just about the job, it was about proving to himself and Kyle that persistence paid off. Meanwhile, at school, Kyle was finding his own footing. After weeks of encouragement from his father, he had joined the soccer team, a decision that initially left him nervous, but quickly turned into something he looked forward to. The practices were grueling, but Kyle loved the camaraderie. For the first time in months, he felt like he belonged to something larger than himself. His coach praised his determination, and his teammates started calling him Rocket for the speed he brought to the field. The change didn't go unnoticed at home. Silas saw it in the way Kyle carried himself, shoulders straighter, his laughter coming more easily. Their evenings now included conversations about corner kicks and penalty shots, with Kyle often reenacting key moments from practice, his eyes sparkling with excitement. On Saturday morning, the pair decided to take a break from their usual routines. Silas suggested a walk in the park, a place they hadn't visited in what felt like ages. The air was crisp but pleasant, and the paths were lined with families, joggers, and the occasional street performer. Kyle dribbled a soccer ball as they strolled, weaving it between his feet with a skill that had clearly improved. "What's next for you at work, Dad?" Kyle asked, kicking the ball ahead and catching up with it effortlessly. Silas considered the question. "There's a lot I want to accomplish," he said, "but first, I need to make sure I get this client back on track. If I can do that, maybe Magnus will trust me with even bigger projects." Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you're playing midfield, just like me," he said. "You're setting things up so the team can score." Silas chuckled. "I like that analogy. Maybe I should hire you as my coach." They found a bench near a small pond and sat down, watching ducks glide lazily across the water. After a moment of silence, Kyle said, "I think I want to keep playing soccer, you know. Maybe even try out for varsity when I get older. Do you think I could do it?" Silas turned to his son, his face serious. "Kyle, you can do anything you set your mind to. Just remember, it takes effort, patience, and sometimes a little luck. But yeah, I believe you can do it." Kyle smiled, his confidence bolstered by his father's words. They sat there a while longer, talking about the future, not just the immediate one, but the dreams and goals that seemed a little more reachable now. For the first time in a long time, both Silas and Kyle felt like they were on solid ground. As they made their way back home, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground. Silas glanced at Kyle, who was kicking the ball ahead and chasing after it with the carefree energy of a boy who finally believed in the possibilities before him. Silas couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. They had come a long way, but there was still so much more to achieve. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next. Silas sat in the small, sunlit living room, watching Kyle work intently on a jigsaw puzzle spread across the coffee table. The boy's focus was unwavering, each piece clicking into place with precision. Silas leaned back in the worn armchair, his mind drifting to the events that had brought them to this moment. He thought about Magnus and the unexpected test that had changed his life. The memory felt distant, yet vivid. A cold morning, the man hunched on the steps, and the simple gesture of sharing what little he had. Silas had never imagined that act would lead to an opportunity, let alone a transformation. "Kyle," Silas began, his voice steady, "you remember the story I told you about that old man I helped outside Seraphis Consultants, the one I gave my last piece of bread to?" Kyle looked up, puzzled. "Yeah, what about him?" Silas paused for a moment, then continued. "That man was Magnus, the owner of the company. He was out there pretending to be homeless, testing people, not for their skills or resumes, but for their kindness." Kyle's jaw dropped. "Magnus? The Magnus? He was testing you?" "That's right," Silas said. "I didn't know it at the time, but that one small act, helping someone when I had so little myself, ended up changing our lives. Magnus believed that the kind of person who would give without expecting anything in return is the kind of person worth having on his team." Kyle nodded slowly, his expression a mix of awe and understanding. The evening light dimmed, and their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the seed of the story lingered. In the days that followed, Silas found himself revisiting the memory of Magnus's test, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the values he now aimed to uphold. With time, Silas began to share his story more openly. He attended local community events, speaking to small groups of job seekers, single parents, and anyone struggling to find their way. His words were straightforward but powerful. He told them about his hardest days, his smallest victories, and how Magnus's test had turned an act of survival into a lesson about humanity. At one gathering, Silas spoke to a group of single parents at a community center. He told them about his darkest hours, the days when hope felt out of reach, and how Magnus's test had illuminated a path forward. His words resonated with the audience, many of whom saw their own struggles mirrored in his story. Silas's message was simple yet profound. Kindness is not a weakness, but a strength. It connects people, even when circumstances seem bleak. He emphasized that no matter how small an act of generosity might feel, its impact could ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. In the weeks that followed, Silas took steps to create opportunities for others. At work, he collaborated with Magnus to organize charity drives, collecting donations for local shelters and food banks. The initiatives gained momentum, and soon the culture at Seraphis Consultants began to shift. Employees found purpose beyond their daily tasks, fostering a sense of community within the company. Kyle, inspired by his father's story, also embraced the value of giving. On weekends, he volunteered at a youth center, helping younger kids with schoolwork and organizing soccer games. The experience brought him a sense of pride and fulfillment as he saw how small gestures could brighten someone else's day. Back at Seraphis Consultants, Silas continued to lead by example. His dedication to creating meaningful change earned him respect from colleagues and strengthened his bond with Magnus. Together, they worked to integrate the values of compassion and community into the company's mission, ensuring that its success was measured not only in profits, but in the lives it touched. At home, Kyle often shared stories from his time at the youth center. He spoke about the kids who had overcome challenges, their small victories serving as reminders of the power of encouragement. Silas listened intently, proud to see the lessons of kindness taking root in his son's life. On a quiet Sunday morning, Silas and Kyle stood in the backyard. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil. Kyle idly tossed a football from hand to hand, his thoughts lingering on the stories his father had shared. Silas, standing nearby, reflected on how far they had come. The journey had been anything but easy, marked by challenges that had tested their resilience. And that's the story of Silas and Kyle, a journey that shows how a single act of kindness can ripple through our lives and transform not just ourselves, but everyone around us. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where kindness, yours or someone else's, made a difference in your life? Maybe it was something small, or maybe it was life-changing. Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where we inspire each other to believe in the power of compassion. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can keep spreading positivity, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.